Welcome everyone to the City of Glendale's virtual community workshop with an introduction to districting. We're so glad you've joined us this evening. My name is Jennifer Nentwig. I'm a principal with Trippepi Smith, and I'm your facilitator here tonight and part of the team assisting Glendale with outreach about this important issue. Here with us tonight, we also have Dr. Douglas Johnson from National Demographics Corporation, the demography firm working with the City of Glendale. Doug, would you like to say hi and share anything else about yourself?
Sure. Thank you everyone for joining us, and it should be hopefully an interesting discussion, and we hope that you will all certainly share your thoughts as we get through these many draft maps to discuss.
Thank you. And here with us tonight, we also have City Attorney Michael Garcia. So Michael, anything else you'd like to share?
Oh, thank you everybody for joining.
All right, we can move on to the next slide then. Before we dig into the meat of the workshop, we do want to note that this meeting is being recorded. So the recording of this meeting will be posted to the city's districting website, mapglendale.org. So you can go back and watch it again later, or so community members who couldn't make it here tonight can also watch and learn about the process. So moving on to the next slide. We do have a few segments during tonight's workshop where we'll be looking for your feedback and input. So especially during those times, we'd like you to take advantage of the Zoom features enabled in the webinar. One of those is to raise your hand to speak. And at that time, we'll go ahead and ask you to unmute and you can speak. And we also have the Q&A feature enabled for this webinar. So you're welcome to type your questions out into the Q&A as well. And that brings us to our next slide. So again, before we really dig into the meat of the workshop, we want to make sure that we start by going over the goal for this session. And for folks who have been following along with the process, at this point in the process, our goal through this workshop and the rest of the workshops in this phase is to gather feedback on the map that should be included when voters decide whether to change to by-district elections. So that's really our goal. We'll be digging into a little bit about the draft maps that have been received and starting to gather feedback on those maps. So that's where we are in the process, and that is the goal of tonight's session. And then here is an overview of what we'll be getting into tonight. So we'll start off just by providing a little bit of background on the current election system and the proposed transition. That will really set the stage for the conversation we'll have about draft maps and feedback. We'll go over the districting question timeline, legal requirements for districts. Then we'll really get into a review of the draft maps and pulling those up for you to take a look at. Then we'll open it up and ask for your thoughts on those draft maps. We'll provide a review of public mapping tools for anyone who might want to dig in and still work on a proposed map based on the feedback that you may have. And then we'll wrap up with information on how to stay engaged. And that brings us to the section that we'll turn over to Doug. So over to you to talk about the current election system.
So thank you, Jen. So just as a quick intro to the project, for those that have not been following closely, as you're probably aware, right now the city has what are called at-large, or sometimes referred to as citywide council elections. So the 5 council members come up in alternating shifts. So in 2024, 2 seats will be up. 3 seats, the other 3 are then up in 2026 because each council member serves a 4-year term. And anyone in the city can run in any of the years, and all the voters in the city cast as many votes as there are seats open. So 2 in 2024, or 3 for the 3 seats in 2026. And then whatever top 2 or top 3, depending on the year, candidates get the most votes, they're elected. So it's all citywide and everyone's voting for each post. So obviously these are big elections. And then for the mayor, it's simply chosen by the council. So it rotates each year. The council votes for who will serve as mayor. So that's our current system. And then the proposed new system that voters will be voting in March whether to adopt or not. Can you go to the next slide? There we go. Is to go to what are called district elections and to expand the council as well. So we'll go from the current 5 to 7 on the council, including the mayor. So the idea, again, this is not final, it's going to go to the voters for approval. But the idea would be to have 6 districts drawn in the city. And each district would hold its election every 4 years. So council member to still serve a 4-year term. The difference would be that the candidate to represent a district has to live in that district, and only the district residents would vote for who will represent their district. So we'll have one council member from each of the 6 districts they'll be drawn in the city. And separately, the mayor would be elected still by a citywide vote. So each resident would be voting for their council member and for a mayor. So you have 2 members of the 7 that you would vote for. This does get the city into what's called a safe harbor, where but because we have district elections, we cannot be sued under the California Voting Rights Act, CVRA. And that's part of the reason we've seen this switch statewide. Over 190 cities have made this transition so far. And the idea of the citywide mayor and a district is each voter would be represented by one person who kind of represents their neighborhood and their region, and then the mayor, who they would still be voting for, who really represents the whole city. And again, all this is subject to voter approval this coming March. As part of the process, there are many steps required in this process. These are all, the basics are required by state law, and then the city is kind of going above and beyond it in these community outreach forums and other efforts. But we started back in June with the first hearing. And the first 2 hearings in June and July were really informative, both to share information about the process and to gather information from residents on what neighborhoods and other thoughts they want to take into account when draft maps are drawn. There was also a big round, many of you may have attended, of community forums, starting similar to this round with a virtual workshop, and then 6 in-person workshops around the city. And Jen and the Trepepi Smith team all went to the various pop-up events with information to encourage people to participate. So those all happened in June and July. Also, residents have been submitting maps. Those are the maps we're going to go through this evening. And so we got our first wave of maps, and then all the draft maps were really discussed in public for the first time at the council meeting the other night on August 15th. And so that's what brings us to the next slide. Now we're kicking off the second round of community forums, starting with tonight's virtual workshop, and then there'll be a series of in-person workshops just like before. And these will go through September 7th. And meanwhile, residents still can submit more maps. So you have until the September 28th. So as we go through this, think about which maps you might like of the current group and how they might be made better. Or if you want something completely different, you can still have a chance to draw in, to go in and draw that before September 28th. And then all those maps will be posted by October 3rd. And that's when we'll have the full range of maps posted on the website. Residents and the council members can go through them and look at them, leading up to our expectation October 10th, that would be the point at which the council would pick a map. They may get to one map, they may add another meeting in, but the schedule is right now to pick a map on October 10th and introduce the ordinance that would set all this up for the ballot. It does take a second reading, so that ordinance and the map that was chosen would then be confirmed by the council on the 24th, and that would also be the last scheduled hearing. But unusual for a city issue, the council's adoption of the ordinance is not the final step. The final step is left to the voters, who next March will vote on whether or not to approve this change and how the council is elected. It's worth noting, of course, that next March is also our next city council election. And so because this system will not be in place yet, our March council election will be still a citywide or at-large election, just like the past ones have been. There won't be any change for this election. If the voters approve the change, this would kick in, and our first district election would be in 2026. That's that. So when we're looking at these maps, we have a set of requirements and goals or principles to evaluate them based upon. The first is federal laws. So the federal government requires that we have an equal number of people in each district. And it is total people. So it's not registered voters or anything like that. It's equal number of total people. And it's a very strict rule. There's only a couple of percent plus or minus that each district can be from that target population. So that's the first and a fairly strict rule. We also have to be sure that the maps comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act in terms of not diluting any of what the law calls a protected classes voting power. And at the same time, the federal law bans racial gerrymandering. So race is one factor we can look at, but it cannot be what the courts call the predominant factor. So that can't, a percentage or a certain racial consideration can't be the predominant factor in why a map is chosen. We really want to focus on neighborhoods. And that brings us to the state requirements, in the second column here. California has what's called the Fair Maps Act, which is its statute on districting, which has in priority order, that's why they're numbered in this box. The districts first must be contiguous. They must have as many undivided neighborhoods and communities of interest as possible. Then third in the priority order list is follow easily identifiable boundaries, so major roads, rivers, that kind of thing. And then fourth in the prioritized criteria is be compact. And the state defines that as not bypassing one group of people to get to another group of people. And again, these are prioritized, so something might be non-compact if it helps you achieve a higher priority item. The state also has a prohibition, which is that the maps cannot be drawn to favor or discriminate against a political party. So those are the federal and state requirements. Those are things we must do. Then if we have multiple maps that meet all those requirements, the courts have said it's perfectly fine to consider what the courts call traditional redistricting principles. And that can be looking at future population growth. So within that equal population requirement, we can slightly, by a few percent, not very much, but by a few percent, underpopulate a district that we know is going to grow faster than the rest of the city. And you can also, again, once all the federal and state criteria have been met, you can consider which map would pair fewer current council members. And the idea there is that re-election decisions should still be up to the voters. So where possible, it is acceptable. It's not required, but it is acceptable to look at which map might leave more re-election decisions up to the voters rather than saying these two or three have to be in one district and you have to pick one. So those are the rules and traditional principles that we have to evaluate these maps under. Next slide. I am happy to say Glendale residents have been engaged in this process. We have received 22 maps from the public so far. Those of you that were watching Tuesday night's hearing, the count was 19 then. We have 3 more maps that have been added since then. So of those 22, 2 of them were partial maps. The residents just drew one district, which is perfectly fine. We do encourage that. Feel free to just draw a district for your part of the city if you prefer. But those are obviously not official maps that can be adopted. We've actually incorporated those into other maps now. 4 of the maps were not population balanced, including one map that was submitted that was only had 5 districts because the resident preferred 5 to 6 districts. And another one was a 7 district map. Again, the resident preferred 7 districts to 6 districts. We're not going to go through those because they weren't population balanced, so they're not legal maps to adopt. And then 2 of the maps turned out to be identical, submitted by different people who submitted the same map. And then NDC, as part of our role, we fill in the blanks. So for example, we took those 2 single district maps and drew them into a new map and offered another map based on community input that we heard, but where people hadn't actually drawn it. And so that added 2 more maps. And then the discussion at the council meeting has led to 2 new maps that we'll show you tonight as well. So now we've got 19 maps to go through, which is a lot to go through. So stick with us as we go through these maps and let us know your thoughts. Going into it, I will share a little bit of what we've heard already because these maps have been online and discussed at the council hearing. So as you're looking at these maps, you can evaluate whether some of these concerns you share. If not, don't worry about it. But you can think about these, and if you agree with these concerns, you can look at which maps you think do or do not do these things. So one resident at the hearing talked about it didn't make sense. Many of the maps combine the Kenneth Village, kind of hillside part of Northwest Glendale with the Crescenta Highlands area in the far north of Glendale, going across, or in some cases around the Verdugo Mountains. So that was a concern that resident felt that those weren't practical ways to draw districts. So that was one concern expressed. We have had residents expressed concerns that they don't want to see South Glendale divided into too many pieces. It has too many, there's too much population south of the freeway to just have one district down there. There will be at least two and then a part of a third just on a population basis. But some of the maps have, more than just one piece coming in. So there was a concern about too many pieces in the south. There have been a couple of comments just generally about this neighborhood or that neighborhood being divided in certain maps. So that's obviously something we want to avoid where we can. One resident was concerned about dividing the Rancho neighborhood over close to Burbank, essentially west of I-5, with the part of Southwest Glendale that borders the city of Los Angeles, because they thought that kind of arc of the city deserved to be together. Many others have submitted maps going the other way, but that was a concern expressed. And then there's an area I'll talk about in the maps, because many people haven't heard the term, but there's a Tropico area that is between Brand and Glendale boulevards. That in many of the maps and kind of visually, it looks nice to put that with Adams Hill, but the residents are saying that is a heavily densely populated, mainly apartments, and belongs more with the west side of Brand than it does with the more homeowner populated Adams Hill area. And then some folks from Adams Hill have talked for that same issue of different socioeconomic characteristics, that perhaps Adams Hill goes better with the canyons than with the rest of South Glendale. So you'll see maps that do it both ways as we go through this process. So that's just a handful of the concerns that people have expressed about the maps that you can keep in mind as we jump through the maps. So let me, we'll shift over. I'm going to share my screen for this part. No. Give us 1 second to shift over. We'll jump in. Because to go through these maps, I'm going to use the interactive review map. Because that lets us look at different maps. So this, as you can see, is the city website for this project. It's mapglendale.org. There's lots of information on here. If you haven't visited it, please do. There's the calendar of all the meetings, including all of those outreach events are on there. The draft maps that I'll come back to in just a moment. Some new district pro and cons. A lot of residents have asked about why are we doing this? Why districts? Why not? And not districts. There's a little summary there. If you want to draw a map after you come through this, either to revise a current proposal or to draw your own, all the information and links to do that are here on this page. And then there's frequently asked questions and other resources and background information. But let me go to the draft maps page. So I do want to highlight a couple of things here before I go to the interactive review map. First of all the maps are listed here. The ones that are not population balanced are noted. If you click on the number here, it will bring up a PDF. My computer will actually try to save it to my hard drive, so I'm just going to show you one that I already have. It brings up a PDF that has the map, so you can print it out if you want to, have it at home or take with you to a council meeting or a forum. On these PDFs are a couple of things. First, the election sequence of which districts would be up in which years are all listed for each map. And then there's a lot of demographics. So total population percentages, citizen voting age population percentages. So a lot of ethnic numbers up front. And then as we get down below, there's language spoken at home data. And then what's been a big focus of this project so far is single family residences versus multifamily residences, and then renters and owner occupied housing. So you can look and see how many districts are in this map that are estimated to be majority renter occupied housing. And you can see in this map, 102, there are 4 that are majority renter occupied and 2 that are homeowner occupied. So all that data is here for each of the maps. So if you do want to get into the demographics, we do encourage you to go there. The other thing that is on the website, because the normal census data, as many folks are aware, do not count Armenians. And obviously that's a big community here, as they were when we worked in Burbank and in Pasadena. And so what we've done is provide a separate report of that. And so if you click on this link here above the list, it'll bring up this sheet, which gives that same district by district demographics. And it's the Armenian percentage of the total registered voters in each district. Again, these are estimates, they're imperfect. The red numbers are those not population balance maps, so don't worry too much about that. And then the gray is either where, if they only do one district, those two maps that only had a single district, there's only one number. And then you can see the 7 district map here has all 7 districts. The others obviously only have 6 districts filled in because there is no 7th district in the rest of the maps. So lots of demographic data available for anyone that wants to dive into those PDF maps. If you're looking more for your interactive review map, let me jump into this. Takes a minute. Each time you come in, you get the really easy to use instructions. So this little screen is all there is about how do you navigate? Well, plus, minus, or just click and drag the screen around. You can enter your address up here in the search box, and it will zoom to that location. And as you'll see in a moment, there are various layers that will appear and give you options. So here you can see the layers. The other piece to mention is the base map gallery up here. This gives you different options. So if you wanted to zoom in and see a satellite image. So if you want to see, like, where's the college? Oh, well, you can see the college right there in the satellite image. It's really easy to pick out different features. And you can switch back and forth to the streets map using the space map gallery. So that's a little bit of introduction to the interactive review map. First of all, all the maps are here. So you can see if you click through them. Also, there's some other useful information. We have the homeowner association map. So these are the individual parcels that are in each homeowner association. If you came to one of the first round forums, you saw the approximate neighborhood boundaries that we talked about. These are not official. They're just kind of a quick reference guide that is available showing the different neighborhoods. Also available in here is the school district trustee areas. So if you want to get a sense of where those lines go, keep in mind, of course, the school district includes unincorporated La Crescenta as well, and has 5 versus the 6 districts we're looking at here. But you can see the lines and kind of how they ended up dividing different parts. One of the interesting things I wanted to highlight is note, in particular in the South, the school district versus the college district line show how there are many very valid choices, depending on the jurisdiction and your preferences. You can have 2 different choices, neither one being wrong. They're just different ways. So for example, Glendale Unified comes down here and divides the South into kind of an east and west South district. In contrast, Glendale Community College District comes across Colorado and goes up to Broadway a little bit for population reasons, but has a north-south configuration in South Glendale. So 2 very different approaches. Obviously, there are different policy issues and local neighborhood considerations, but when you're talking about the school district versus the college. And so each jurisdiction came to different choices, and these are here for you to reference and look at. And keep that in mind as we're looking at council district lines. There can be 2 very different views of preferences, both of which are perfectly valid. And then there's zoning data available if you want to look at kind of where are the business areas, where's the single family housing zones, where's the multifamily housing zones. All that's available here too. And as you zoom in, you can, as we get closer, you can see different data, percent Latino, that kind of ethnic data is up here as well. So lots of data in this map. But its main use, what we'll use it for tonight, is going through the maps. So I do recommend that you have a pen or something handy to take notes, because we do have a lot of maps to walk through and we do want to get your impressions. So definitely, jot down your thoughts as we go along about what you like or don't like as we go. But I'm going to jump around a little bit to discuss maps by characteristic rather than just kind of storing through number by number, since the numbers are simply the order the map came in. So let me start first with kind of give you kind of a range of what maps have shown. So for example, we've got map 106. This was the first map to come in that has a horizontal southern district, kind of like the college did. So we get District 4 that's below Maple. And then we get District 5 that's below Glen Oaks. So, and this is the great thing about the interactive review map. I can just roll my mouse roller, or I can plus and minus up here and go in and out and really see the details. So you can see we've got District 4 following essentially Maple. It does jog up to Orange Grove over here for population balancing. but really below Maple is District 4. 6 kind of captures the middle of the city south of the freeway, getting Brand and the east side of Brand. And then that below Glen Oaks over to Brand and down to Broadway, and then picking up a little bit more over here at District 5. We get the canyons together. Glen Oaks and Chevy Chase are together over here, and then with Verdugo Woodlands, and then getting into the center part of the city, we're northwest from Glen Oaks above in District 1. This is one of the districts that takes the north and does combine it with the hills. So District 2 is Crescenta Heights, and then comes down all the way to Mountain and Cumberland Road and gets the parts of Northwest that go up in the hills as well. So, and it's perfectly fine when you get to your comments to talk about parts of the map that you like and parts of the map you don't like. So if you like District 4 but dislike District 2, that's perfectly fine. Share that thought with us. You're welcome to that. So this map I mentioned because it was unique in the early maps. We since have received other maps that have a southern seat as well. Now this is a good example of comments and feedback led to changes. So as I mentioned, there was concern about Crescenta Highlands being with the hills of Northwest Glendale, just given the geography that there's a giant hill between them. And so we do have a new map that wasn't available Tuesday night. It's 106B, which adjusts the map. So 4, 5, and 6 are just like they were in the original 106. But 1 picks up all that area, and as a result, it doesn't go over as far east. It goes over to Brand, stops at Brand, and then 3 comes over, and 2 comes down a little bit more into Verdugo Woodlands to pick up the population that lost from over here. You can actually see the difference. This is one of the tricks of this tool. So if you turn 2 layers on of 2 similar maps, where the colors are really dark, like up here 2, or really strong, I should say, 3 over here, and 4, 5, and 6, that's where they match. Where the colors are more faded and a little less distinct, that's where there have been changes made between the 2 maps. So you can see the pieces there by overlaying. So that's 106 and 106B. And to give you another end of the spectrum of maps, here's 118. This map has 3 districts making up most of the South. So here we get most of Adams Hill is with the canyon. Remember I talked about some folks think Adams Hill fits better with the canyons than with the rest of South Glendale. So of course it has to be contiguous, as I mentioned, but we get this area going across. Then you get a central between Brand and Glendale, this kind of narrow corridor. This is that Tropico area I was talking about. It's heavily renters and multifamily. So it's drawn in with this central District 4. Then District 5. One of the things as I look at these maps, you may agree or disagree, but we found through this process that really all the way up to Glen Oaks is heavily renters. So while traditionally we think of the city as north and south of the freeway, socioeconomically it really is Glen Oaks in the middle of the city down. So 5 is really an all South Glendale seat, even though it goes up to Glen Oaks for part of it. Then over here we get a different take. 6 comes all the way up to Kenneth because it's not coming down and picking up that more densely populated area south of the freeway. And then 2 is Kenneth and up, and then it comes down and gets the center part of the city. So a very different approach. And again, I'm not talking a lot about the north because the north kind of ends up where the north ends up. It's always going to be there. The question is what gets put with it to make the complete district. So in this case, it's really getting the Glendale Freeway corridor, both sides of it coming down. And then the third kind of giving you a wide range of options of maps that are out there is map 120. This was a map officially drawn by us, the demographers, but by taking the pieces of other maps. So District 1 in this map is the single district map, District 1 that was submitted just as a single district of Crescenta Highlands, the north, coming over and going and avoiding splitting Verdugo Woodlands. So it goes over and gets the Emerald Isle area over here and down to Chevy Chase Drive. Then 6 is really Verdugo Woodlands, and then coming south from there to pick up the population. 2 is really Glen Oaks Shoal Canyon area, coming down and getting all of Adams Hill. And I mentioned District 1 was drawn as a single district. This District 2 comes out of another map I'll show later that was submitted by the Adams Hill neighborhood group organization. So that's taking a map out of another, a district out of another map. And then I mentioned the group that wanted the Rancho to be with the southwest bordering Los Angeles. So they also submitted a single district map, and this is their District 3. And then as NDC, we just filled in between that. So again, Glen Oaks North and Northwest becomes 4. Verdugo Woodlands is here. And then we get kind of the Brand and Central corridors in the south of the freeway are together with it, kind of going over Broadway over to Chevy Chase Drive for District 5. So you can really see there's a wide range of ways to draw this. I will note 120 is another one where we got some feedback and made some small changes. So if I put both on, you can see it's very solid, there's strong colors for most of it. There are just a couple of changes. Number one thing that came up was that by following Chevy Chase, we were actually dividing off part of the Chevy Chase neighborhood that was on the south side of it. And so map 120B takes a census block that's mostly hills and open space, but it gets that south side of Chevy Chase Drive and unites that neighborhood. Also, that Tropico area between Brand and Glendale is moved into 3. And then there's a little bit of population balancing. You can see just a square here that comes out. That goes into 2 in order to population balance 2 to make up for the population it lost. And similarly, the border between 3 and 5 shifts a little bit. So that's a way of feedback that, for example, feedback you give us tonight could lead to slightly revised maps as well. But that gives you a range of the options. I'll go faster through the individual maps because we do have quite a few of them. We have a couple of very unusual maps. I mentioned 103 and the district that came, the Adams Hill to Glen Oaks Canyon district. This one actually then has Chevy Chase Canyon coming down all the way into Brand as a second kind of canyon and south of the freeway mix. And then 4 kind of the center of the city, both sides of 134, and then over to the 2. And again, we have District 2 that is the Rancho area with the southwest bordering Los Angeles area. So very different approach of having blended districts that are in and out of South Glendale. A couple of other kind of unusual looking maps. Map 114, the submitter who drew this map kind of looked at the Glen Oaks and 134 corridor as showing a lot of common issues of freeway nearby and things like that. So this map has 2 districts, 1 and 2 that are completely in the south, and then District 4, which kind of picks up that Glen Oaks freeway corridor across there. A very unusual looking district, but that was the thought that the submitter shared on that map. It does have some issues it does have that Crescenta Highlands with the hills of Northwest issue going on. But again, you can like parts of it, dislike parts of it. But that was a very creative approach to that community along the freeway. Another unusual one, 123. You know, when you're drawing around a hill like the Verdugo Mountains, it does lead to some odd lines as the census blocks that we have to use are following the streets in the curve around in the hills. But this is another one. There weren't comments submitted with this, so I don't know what the precise goal and thoughts were. But you do get 1 and 2 again, north and south, on top of each other in the south. And then you get this kind of Glen Oaks 134 district, and then and then the canyons are together over to Verdugo Boulevard here in District 4. 24, and I'm going to go through these because there are so many. Go through them from now on fairly quickly, but feel free in the discussion to ask to see a map in more detail, and we can bring it back up. 124, you know, is an interesting kind of stacking of districts. You got 5 in the far south, then 6 on top of it, then 4 gets that freeway corridor, 3 gets the Rancho and kind of comes across on top, then 2, and then 1 has the north and then comes around and gets the canyons. So it's a creative, we sometimes refer to this as pancake approach to a map. I mentioned there the concern about the north being with the Northwest Hills, and there are a couple maps that triggered that thought. Map 109 is one of them. Again, and what we often find, I don't know this to be fact for any of these maps, but people often spend a lot of time on their district and then just kind of fill in the rest of the map. So, here we have some, I think, very carefully crafted southern districts. We have the canyons all together, with most of Verdugo in here. And then we have the north together, and I don't know that they actually were policy-wise proposing that north with northwest went together. It could just be that that's how the population numbers worked out for them after they did what they really cared about. 110 is a very similar map to that one. And then 115. This is where we start to get an interesting theme, and I'll come back to this too, have kind of a central district. Having Rancho and most of Northwest, having the north and some or most of Verdugo Woodlands, having the canyons out here, in this case with Adams Hill, but that's not always true. And then a central district that's mostly north of 134, picking up a lot of that area, the kind of from Brand or various streets that form the west end. You'll see a handful of these maps. There are a couple that do this without blending the north and the northwest. So here you see, again, the boundary between 3 and 6 is the top of the Verdugo Mountains. We do get Verdugo Woodland. Most of Verdugo Woodlands is with 5. Some of it's in 6 in this. The canyons are together. And in this case, we're getting the central district 4, very compact, going from Glendale Avenue over to Concord Street, just essentially picking up Pacific below Kenneth and going over to Concord. One of the other ones that does this, and again, this is why I'm going through fast. My apologies. We do have a lot of maps we're going to get through. Very similar, map 107, 108. It's funny, this is where the interactive map is so handy, because if we look at 107, you have this very kind of geographically small district 4. 108 has this very geographically large district 4. The difference in population is very small, right? If we overlay them, the only actual difference of populated area is Kenneth Road up. So 108 is picking up those hills off of Kenneth and off of Cumberland, where 107 is not. So always think, match up the geography you see on the map with the city that you know, and it helps understand this is just going up to the middle of Verdugo Mountains. Then the other one that's similar to these is 121. Again, they're getting this central part that goes up in the mountains, the Rancho and most of Northwest, essentially Pacific over. In 4, the canyons are together. Verdugo Woodlands is mostly in 1, and some of the Verdugo area is in 2. And then you get 2 southern districts entirely in the south below the freeway in this map. Looking over at the Rancho and Northwest, we get map 117 that combines those two. Has 2 districts in the south, and then part of Adams Hill. Again, this is Adams Street, goes up and then gets the Glen Oaks Canyon and part of most of Chevy Chase Canyon, but not all of it. And then kind of, it's interesting. It's mostly renters, Glen Oaks, Rancho, and then going up Grandview and getting everything west of Grandview into District 2 in this map. 122, jump over to that. This is another kind of, mentioned this idea earlier of the Rancho and Northwest below Glen Oaks, because that is very heavily renter area along, and then extending down into the heavily renter part of South Glendale as well. So here you get 1 and 2, they're entirely in the south, and you stack them up. I'm getting through this pretty well. I'm getting close, so stick with me. But we'll jump to, if you're looking at that East Tropico, West Tropico area, there are lots of ways to address that concern that came up. There's the horizontal south that has that whole region together, where Adams Hill and west of Brand are all with that Tropico area down here. 106B obviously continues that. And then we get into a whole bunch of maps that do that. 115 has the Tropico area that I was talking about, not with the area west of Brand, but in a entirely South Glendale district. 117 has it all, puts that whole Tropico neighborhood together, from Glendale all the way over to the LA. 118 is again that central south seat. And 121, this is the one that's been adjusted as 120B was, to move that border from Brand over to Glendale to keep that area together. And then the new ones, 123 that just came in, again, has a southern seat, and 124 has not a southern seat, but an Adams Hill, Tropico up to the Freeway District. Let me get into a couple of maps. One of the questions about the South. So map 120, because it's a combination of these different pieces, we do end up with just one district that arguably is entirely South Glendale, that'd be District 5. It does go up to Glen Oaks, but as we talked about, that's all very heavily renter socioeconomically matches South of as well. What it does is the second district down south includes also the Rancho and the heavily renter area below Glen Oaks. And then District 2 takes Adams Hill and puts it with Glen Oaks Canyon. So 120, 120B, we are only getting one district that is arguably all South Glendale, even though we do get others that are socioeconomically similar by going up to the Rancho. The last couple to mention, 103, I mentioned this earlier. If you're looking at that, don't divide the South up too many pieces. That is a concern here, and that there isn't a South Glendale district. There are heavily renter districts, especially two, combining the Rancho with South Glendale, but nothing that's entirely south of the freeway. And then the maps vary in dividing up the neighborhoods as defined by homeowner associations in the north. 102 doesn't really, despite its kind of very unusual District 4, if we overlay the homeowner association neighborhoods, it only divides 0 or 1. These are a couple of maps that only divide one homeowner association / neighborhood, or 0. 106B actually follows the neighborhood association lines very closely in the north. 120 and 120B both do that. 120, as I mentioned, divides Chevy Chase. You can see the division here. And then the 120B change puts all that together, so it doesn't divide any. And 121 only divides northwest, but that's the only divided neighborhood or association. So a lot of maps to go through. Happy, as I said, this is going through it fairly fast. So as you're sharing your thoughts, which we now want to do, I'm happy to come back and bring up a map as you share your thoughts or ask questions about it. So Jen, I will hand back to you to coordinate, letting people know how to share their thoughts.
Of course, thank you. And thank you, Doug, for going through all those maps. As we jump into the process of gathering feedback on the maps themselves, we did get one question in the Q&A that I think will be helpful to put context around the feedback. And the question is essentially asking the reason for looking at draft maps ahead of residents voting on it. And so I'll just go out back and revisit the goal that we shared for this session, in case the person joined late. The goal for this workshop and really for this phase in the process is to gather feedback to really identify the map that would be included when voters decide whether to change to by district elections. So that decision would be put before voters. It will be put before voters. And so this process identifies the map that voters would see when they're making that decision. So would any of our other panelists like to elaborate on that?
I'll just add, as the questioner seems to know, it's an option, right? You can do it before or after. And this way, the voters, when they're voting, will know what map they're voting on. If you put it afterwards, then we go through this whole similar process afterwards, but the council chooses the map if it's done after the vote. Mike, anything you wanted to add?
I would concur. It's a fair question, and I think previously we had put the question to the voters, and in part because that was not successful. I know when the majority of the council members who decided to start this process felt it would be useful for the voters to be able to see what the map would look like when they're deciding whether or not to make this switch.
And it used to be historically, you had to do it this way. State law used to require the city to draw the map first so that the voters knew what they were voting on. Maybe, I don't know the exact number of years, but maybe 10 years ago, the state gave more flexibility and that gave the options. So some cities do it afterwards, but this is the way it was traditionally done. And it does give you that certainty of knowing what you're voting.
All
But
right.
good question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that really does set the stage and provide context for people thinking about the maps and sharing feedback. So we'll open it up and see if anyone would like to raise their hand to share feedback. Whether anything struck you while Doug was sharing the initial presentations of the maps, or if you had a chance to take a look perhaps before this workshop.
Feel free to offer preliminary thoughts. You know, we won't hold you to it. If you change your mind after you have a little more time to look at it, you can certainly email in or come to a future forum and change your mind.
Yeah. And understandably, folks might need a little more time or feel like they want to dig in deeper. Oh, okay. We've got another question in the Q&A. The question is, if there is a distinct Hispanic population, that would be a majority for a district. Is that something that we're able to see based on the data so far?
Yes, so it's a good question because that is a big topic when we talk about the California Voting Rights Act. So there is no way in Glendale to get anywhere near close to a majority Latino district. We do have the data here. As you look at it, like the areas that are green, yellow, and red, the city blocks are majority Latino. And so you can see there's some individual blocks that are majority Latino kind of up in the Rancho. And then as we come down along San Fernando Road and in the southwest bordering LA, there's more of it. But the numbers in these areas are nowhere close to being majority. When we look at the various maps, the numbers we end up with are the maps that keep Rancho with south, kind of the part of the city bordering Los Angeles, end up being about 25% of the eligible voters are Latino. The maps that have them separate are very close. They're about 21%. Keep in mind, there's a plus or minus of about 5% in this data. So no matter how the maps are drawn, you're not going to get above a 21 or 25% Latino district.
All right, thank you for that answer. And I'm not seeing any raised hands. Let's see. Our next question is basically to get more information on the process to prioritize the various proposed maps and the decision-making process for the final map. Anything you'd like to share there, Doug?
We will revisit a little bit the schedule later on as we wrap this today up. But I will say that as the forums go on, hopefully we'll be getting more and more comments from residents that will help shape that. And then it'll go to council. The council, just that's the way the process works under state law. Council will choose ultimately the map that's scheduled for their next the fourth hearing where they would choose that map. Of course, they may choose to add another hearing after that if they're not ready to decide that at that meeting. But yeah, the process would be to offer your thoughts at all these forums or by email in between the forums, come to that council hearing, and then the council to choose that map. And again, they're not the final arbiter. It'll ultimately go to the voters to decide if they agree with the council on that map and the change.
Yep, and along with that, I would just point people again back towards mapglendale.org because that will have the schedule of the events that we're talking about in terms of the next steps. And it really has all of the mechanisms that you would need to provide feedback. So there's a contact tab, there's information on how to draft your own map for input, and all your one-stop shop right there on the website. So that's a good resource too for information and tools for the rest of the process.
Forums are coming quickly. So the next one's Saturday, there are 2 on Saturday, so morning or afternoon, whichever one you make, and then Monday, and then there's a pop-up event on the 25th, and another workshops on the 30th and 31st. So lots of chances, and then the last one will be September 7th.
Yep. And then for folks who may have come to workshops in the past, we capture your input, take photos of things on whiteboards and really pull it all together to then go to council and inform the process. So all of your input in all these forums does matter. All right.
we hit you with a lot of maps, a lot of information. So please feel free to take time and process your thoughts, and don't feel like you have to share a night. You can certainly follow up with an email or come to one of the future forums as well.
Yeah, and we actually did get a question about future forums. So or at future community workshops, what could people expect that maybe they're not getting this evening? So the content will stay essentially the same as Doug and the team potentially gets more maps. Those might be included for presentation moving forward, but it would just be an in-person opportunity to potentially get more hands-on, talk with the team in person, but really the content will be very similar from workshop to workshop for this phase moving forward. Well, thanks everybody for the thoughtful questions.
Jumping back to the PowerPoint, if anyone has thoughts, we have some discussion time later on as well.
Yep, thank you. We do have a second Q&A. So it looks like for now, we can bounce back over.
Just as a reminder, we have our mapping tools. We did mention, if none of these are just what you want, feel free to jump in. We've been looking at the review the maps tool, the interactive review map. We also have a really simple paper map that you can download from the website. And the numbers that are on each of these little areas are the population counts. And it says right here in the top right, how many people you need per district. And so you just draw your, as we call them, population units into a district until you hit that number. And when you finish, you color it in and you can drop it off or mail it to City Hall, or just take a picture and email in that picture. That's a really easy way to draw your own map if you want to do so. There's also an online mapping tool on the website. There's an easy 4-minute video that shows you everything you need to know to use the tool. But you make an account because it is your map. So you do have to create a login, and you can work with your friends. You can start on it and come back to it. And again, you can draw just your own district, or you can, that you want for your area, or you can draw a full citywide map and submit that. So lots of options between really easy paper map that's just total population numbers, or they have all the data you want, and really all the data I have on my computer available to you, because this will give you demographics, as you can see on the top right. The other piece too to mention, I won't do a full demo unless someone wants to stick around at the end and see it, but you can see that these are precincts. This system uses precincts, but if you change it to block, when you click on a precinct, it will what they call shatter the block, shadow the precinct, and you can pick individual city blocks. You can really fine tune your proposed map using this tool. So with that, I'll hand back to Jen. I'll stop screen sharing. Here we go.
Okay, thank you. So as Doug mentioned, we will be sticking around briefly after the formal conclusion of the hearing, or I'm sorry, not the hearing, of the workshop, in case anyone does want to get more in depth with the mapping tools and the tutorial, but we will open it up now for further questions. And we got one new question already, which is asking about getting preferences tonight on people's favorite map. And just to kind of keep consistency in how public comments are being provided and being able to pull that together to share with council, what we'd like to recommend folks do, if you do have a preference, is send an email to that email address, mapglendale@glendaleca.gov. And that way, if you have a preference that you want to make sure is captured, you can send an email there. Again, you are welcome to raise your hand and we can unmute you if you want to share feedback tonight. But as far as identifying a preference, those are the options that we'd recommend. And we'll see if we have any other questions from our participants tonight. And I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment, so we'll give folks another minute or so and see if there are further questions. If not, we have just a few concluding slides to talk about how to engage in the rest of the process. Okay, so we'll move on to our concluding slides and we'll just keep an eye on the Q&A and see if any more pop up. But we do want to make sure that we cover the ways that you can continue to stay engaged in the process. So as you can see, the city is committed to robust outreach and engagement throughout the process, and that includes the dedicated website, myglendale.org. That's your one-stop shop for really all the resources that we've shared tonight. We recommend that you go check that out. There are several workshops that are being conducted throughout the process, including in-person workshops like those coming up on Saturday and virtual workshops like this evening. The city has also been doing pop-up events. So if there are folks who maybe don't have schedules that allow them to participate in workshops, we're going out where people are at different events like concerts and various events like that. So you'll see us out in the community. And then just briefly touching on social media, an animated explainer video online, flyers that we're sending out to community groups for distribution, outreach to those community groups, and then making interpretations and translations available. So again, just really committed to spreading the word about this so that there is awareness and input in the process. And then on to the next slide. As we wrap up tonight, we just want to emphasize how you can continue to engage. You can visit myglendale.org, which you see here on the slide. You can email anytime by emailing myglendale@glendaleca.gov, or you can call the city at 818-548-4844. You can attend those workshops. To just hammer home again, there are 2 in-person workshops coming up this weekend. The first one is in the morning, and I apologize, I'm trying to pull that up, looking at some old information. So the ones this weekend are in the morning.
Yeah, it's 10 a.m. at the Chevy Chase Library.
Yep.
And 2:30 p.m. at the Adult Recreation Center at 201 East Colorado.
Perfect. So those are the workshops that we would encourage you to come to this weekend. And then the next hearing, there's a little bit more time, and that's great to promote engagement, but the next hearing is October 10th at 6 p.m. So all of those are great ways that we'd encourage you to stay engaged and continue to provide input. Again, Doug and I will be staying on in case there is anyone who would like to have a more in-depth tutorial of the mapping tools. And just keeping a quick look at the Q&A, and it looks like we do not have any additional Q&A. So with that, on behalf of the City of Glendale, we do want to thank everyone again for joining to share your feedback and to learn about the process. We hope that you continue participating and engaging, and we hope to see you again at our events coming up in the future. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your evening.